This time last year, I gave a very similar presentation to the one I'm going to give today on an overview of how PV plants are performing in the UK. And I left with two main swing thoughts. The first was likening a PV plant to a cycling team, in particular Team Sky, under the leadership of Dave Brailsford and his mantra, marginal gains, which is where all the really little small things all matter and add up to an improved performance. I thought that was quite similar to how a PV plant should be operated. Since then, Team Sky, they haven't been convicted as drugs cheats, as many of our French counterparts were hoping for, but they actually haven't won anything. So I thought this year I can't really use them as my analogy again because they're not winning so much. The other teams have caught up. So what I'm going to do this year is I will give an overview of the general performance in the UK, but I'll also compare our own teams, or EPC contractors, and their performance, and I'll put together our own podium of EPC contractors and how they've performed in the last few years. And maybe we'll even award the yellow jersey to one of them. So the second point was on the monitoring. When I was trying to gather data last year, it was very difficult due to the poor quality of the monitoring systems and the monitoring of PV plants. So it actually made it very difficult. And I just want to give an update on this for this year's presentation. So why can I talk about the operational performance of the UK PV industry? I work for a technical advisor called OST Energy. We advise lenders, developers and owners on the technical risk of renewable energy projects. In terms of PV, we've worked on about 10 gigawatts of projects worldwide. And we're involved right from the green field. We do irradiation assessments, feasibility studies. We even do planning applications. We've actually still got 100% success rate on our planning applications. We do technical due diligence, construction monitoring, all the way through to asset management and managing projects on behalf of the owner. Sorry. So we do have a good overview of the industry. In fact, in the UK, we've worked on, in some way or another, around about half of the large-scale installations that have been constructed. And I've managed to gather a lot of that data, not all of it. And we also have looked at a lot of residential rooftop projects. But this presentation is solely about large-scale ground mount. So I'll start with irradiation. As you know, this is the fuel supply for your project. And I've gathered some data from around 15 MET stations around the UK to have a look at how last year and 2012 and 13 compared to the long-term average. This is the first of many graphs I'll show you in this presentation. It's a lovely bell-shaped graph. I'll state the obvious. It shows that it's sunny in summer and it's not so sunny in winter. But as you can see from this graph, it looks like winters are generally quite consistent and summers tend to be more variable. That isn't actually the case. It's just a bit of a deceptive graph. So we look at it in another way and look at the percentage deviation from the long-term average. And as you can see here, there are quite large deviations month by month. And this graph shows quite obviously that the red line's 2012 was quite a bad year in terms of sunshine. 2013 and 14, blue and green, were quite good years. And in fact, last year, you should have expected around 3.5% more radiation on your site than the long-term average. So if your plant is performing in line with how your EPC contractor tells you it's performing, you should have received slightly higher revenues. If you haven't received slightly higher revenues, something's gone wrong, and you probably want to give me a call and we can have a look at your project. Sorry. So then we look at the performance ratio. This is the measure of how effective your plant is at converting sunlight into electricity. This is how we compare the performance of PV projects. This is what your EPC contractor guarantees you. This is one of the inputs into your financial model. That's the equation there. I don't really want to go into much detail about the equation, but if you've got questions about it, please come and see me afterwards. So the data I've managed to gather. I do only have a sample of the industry. That's important to know. I've only managed to gather just under about a gigawatt of data. I don't have information from all the projects. I don't have information from all the contractors. Paul Camp from Electric, lovely guy, won't let me anywhere near his plants. if there are contractors out there who want to send me some more information to add into the mix, that would be very helpful.
Must be diesel gens heads there, is there?
I'm just teasing, Paul. So I had around about 900 and something megawatts of data. I actually had to bin probably 250 megawatts of the data because it was too sparse. I couldn't backfill the data appropriately. So I'm alluding to what I'm going to say about the monitoring again. So I was left with over 100 projects, 18 different EPC contractors, about 17 different module manufacturers, and 11 inverters. So the first thing I'm going to show you is a graph. I just have to step out of this. So what I've done, first of all, is I've gathered the information on all the projects on a monthly basis. This graph shows irradiation on the y-axis and the performance ratio on the x-axis. And what we're going to do is we're going to have 2 years in the life of a PV project, and we're going to see how the performance changes month by month from January 2012 to October 2014. I don't have to the end of 2014. I ran out of time. As I said, I've got an awful lot of projects, and mining all that data is quite time consuming. So first of all, I'll just play it. If you saw it last year, it's been updated, but it's pretty similar. If you weren't here last year, then just enjoy the ride, and I'll give some commentary on the second time round. So hopefully this will work. There we go. I should mention there's the big white blob in the middle is the average of all the projects, and the size of the blobs represents the size of the project. See, a lot more plants arrived in 2014. So there we go. There's an awful lot of data, and you've just experienced how a PV plant lives for a couple of years. So let's run it again, and there's just a few things to note from this. The first is the sort of C shape that the white blob follows, the average, showing that the performance ratio is lower in winter, higher in spring and autumn, and then lower again in summer. And the second thing is the spread of the data. It's quite varied, even though a lot of these projects are in very similar locations. So that's where I've got a problem with the monitoring systems, in that I'm not quite sure we're recording irradiation on site accurately enough. So I'll just step back into the presentation. So my main comments are, I still had to backfill with a lot of data. The monitoring has improved, especially on the more mature plants. So it seems like contractors in the second and third years of operation have finally sorted out the monitoring, but the irradiation is still being measured by the contractors. I did recommend last year that we should have the irradiation measured independently, so this can be verified independently when you're looking at your guarantees under the EPC contract. Or in fact, we could even use satellite data, which is used on a lot of the residential rooftop portfolios where you can't put a pyranometer on every site. So we move on. This slide really is to remind me to tell you that we shouldn't get too hung up on the numbers I'm about to show. It's more about the trends. I've got an awful lot of data, but it is unfiltered. I haven't checked every single plant to see how it's performing. I've just amassed a lot of data, and it's just the general trends I want to see rather than the specific numbers themselves. So we're going to start with an overview of how my portfolio, I'm going to call it my portfolio, although I haven't built or I don't own any of the projects, but it's the data I've gathered. We're going to see how that portfolio has performed in the last 3 years. So here's another graph. It's not moving, although it's potentially more interesting than the all singing, all dancing dynamic graph. We'll start just by looking at the red bars. So this is the average performance ratio across the total portfolio. And as you can see, it's increasing, which is good. The projects in 2014 are performing better than they were in 2012. But what is the reason for this? Is it because the plants are maturing, there's new equipment, there's new contractors building better projects? This is when we have to look at those lines. So that the light blue line is at the top is only projects constructed in 2011, and the dark blue line is only those projects constructed in 2012. And if I had the 2013 constructed projects, the dot would appear halfway up the red bar in 2014. So there's two main points I want to make about that graph. The first is that the first year performance is lower than the second and third year performance. So we are seeing teething issues, which I think is expected, but these numbers show that this is actually a reality. So that's something to bear in mind when talking to your EPC contractors, or even if you're a contractor guaranteeing the performance ratio. And the second thing I just wanted to share is that, sorry, I'm losing my voice, is that the performance ratio has actually dropped after the warranty period on these 2011 plants. I haven't mined the data in great detail. I think it'll be more interesting next year when we've got a lot more data to see whether this is something that we need to be concerned about. But I just wanted to present that to you because it's quite interesting. So the second thing I did was compare all the string inverters against central inverters, because there's always this age-old discussion, which one has a higher performance ratio, which one performs better in the UK. So I just actually want to see a show of hands who thinks that the string inverters have performed better than the central inverters. Not many. Okay, well, we'll have a look. So you're half right. In 2013, strings were significantly lower. In 2014, they're slightly higher. The reason in 2012 as well, and 13, is there were some widespread failures of string inverters pretty much across all manufacturers in the UK. There were a lot of problems, hence the lower performance ratio, as it does include availability. I think 2014 is showing a more true reflection of how they're performing, which is only marginally higher than the centrals. So on to the main event. I'm going to show how the contractors have been performing against each other. So these are the contractors I've got data for, and then I'll move on to the podium, if you like. So this is it. This is the range. Unfortunately, I cannot share the names of the contractors. I was expecting a big groan then, for a couple of reasons, really. First reason is I don't have all the projects each contractor has constructed, so I've only got a portion of them. So I don't really think it's fair. I'm only comparing half a portfolio of one contractor with half a portfolio for another. The other thing is, with this portfolio, some of the contractors have only built one or two projects in this portfolio, and others have built over 20. So I don't think it's fair to compare a one project portfolio with a portfolio of 20. So what I did is I extracted the contractors who have built more than 10 projects in my portfolio and have a look at their results. As you can see, it's quite interesting. They are all centering in that 80 to 85% range, and I think that can sort of explain away the anomalies at the top and the bottom. You're probably all wondering who contractor 13 is, because they are performing slightly higher than the others. But if we look at these contractors in a bit more detail, this actually shows the range of PRs from those projects. So the range of PRs is actually quite large. And so some of them are in their first year, some of them are in their third year. So it is just a bit of a mix of projects. I just wanted to show this because the range of PRs is higher than I was expecting per contractor. But there are many reasons for this, and some of them are actually out of the contractor's control even. So, say site selection and design, you might want to squeeze more megawatts onto your site, but it still works in your financial model, and you'll sacrifice a couple of percentage points on your PR. But as long as your IRR is still consistent, that shouldn't really matter. So some of them are designed to have slightly lower PR. Construction quality is a big factor. Especially when we're up against tight deadlines, as we are this March, there is a variable construction quality between contractors and even subcontractors. Some contractors use a number of different subcontractors. It would be interesting to see actually how the subcontractors compare against each other within the contractor portfolios. Then equipment failures, availability and O&M effectiveness. This may or may not be the responsibility of the EPC contractor, normally is in the first 2 years, but going on from this it might not be. And finally, component performance. If your modules are performing better than you thought they were going to, you're going to have higher performance, nothing to do with the contractor. So, just the last final thoughts. The monitoring and asset management is getting better. There is still room for improvement. It's going to become more important in the secondary market, and as we move from a construction period, which we're in now, into an operational period, which is sure to come. So on plant performance, first year is lower from the data I've gathered. Contractors are stabilising sort of low 80s, and there are many factors affecting the performance, not just the EPC contractors. And finally, who won the yellow jersey? I guess you'll never know. Thank you.